How many more people in Canada have to die? How many more people have to be stabbed, shot, or raped by repeat violent offenders before we say, as a country, that something has to change? Just over a week ago, 10 innocent Canadians lost their lives and another 17 were injured in the deadliest stabbing spree in the history of Canada. The victims included mothers like 49-year-old Lana Head, matriarchs like 48-year-old Bonnie Burns, and veterans like 66-year-old Earl Burns, who had served his country with pride. But while some tragedies are inescapable, this one decidedly was not. The lead perpetrator of the attack was 30-year-old Miles Sanderson, a man who had previously been convicted 59 times and charged with crimes up to and including attempted murder. In 2018, he stabbed 2 men with a fork and beat another until he lost consciousness. In 2017, he pistol whipped another man, stomped on his head, and made him rob a restaurant with a gun. And in 2015, 2 years before that, he stabbed and attempted to kill the very same veteran, Earl Burns, who he would successfully finish off just 7 years later. And yet, despite this uninterrupted record of violence, of intimidation and destruction, Canada's justice system just kept releasing Sanderson back into society over and over again. Most recently, it was the Parole Board who had the option of reincarcerating Sanderson in February after it was found he had violated the terms of his earlier received statutory release. Instead, the board stated it was their opinion that Sanderson's release would, quote, not present an undue risk to society, and that it would actually contribute to our protection by, quote, facilitating his reintegration as a law-abiding citizen. Now, as a result of their decision, 10 innocent Canadians are dead. But the decision of the Parole Board is just a symptom of a much larger problem. Why, after this cascading spree of violence, was Sanderson up for parole at all? Why did judges appointed by the federal government continually hand out shorter sentences than they were permitted to do? Why was Sanderson allowed to serve out much of his time not incarcerated in a jail, but relaxing at a healing lodge? And why are Canada's politicians, instead of getting tougher on violent crime, actually passing laws as we speak, including Bill C-5, that would actually reduce sentences for violent criminals? Instead of getting tough on crime, we seem content to facilitate its perpetuation. And there's one other thing that needs to be said, even though it's not politically correct. Another reason Sanderson was likely handed a reduced sentence was his Indigenous background, which is literally codified in our justice system through a pre-sentencing process called Gladue reports. This process is discriminatory. It's patronizing to the vast majority of Indigenous Canadians who are obviously not criminals, and as we've seen, actually leaves Indigenous Canadians themselves, most of all, at greatest risk. Now, I wish I could say this won't happen again, that our justice system had learned its lesson, but it will, and it hasn't. And that really won't change until we refocus away from always protecting the interests of violent criminals and instead start standing up for victims, their families, and the safety of our communities.